A Boeing 747 stood at the end of the runway, engines thundering in the misty air. Thick fog wrapped around the airport, visibility dropping dangerously low. The pilot pushed the thrust levers forward, and the massive jet surged down the runway, headlights cutting through the haze. The aircraft had reached that crucial speed, the point where aborting takeoff was nearly impossible. But then, out of the fog, a shadow emerged, another Boeing 747, heading directly toward them on the same runway. Two giants, face to face, seconds away from catastrophe. How could such a situation ever happen? How did two aircraft, each commanded by experienced pilots, end up on the same stretch of asphalt, charging toward each other? The answer lies in a series of small decisions, misunderstandings, and tragic coincidences that would lead to the deadliest aviation disaster in history. The story begins a day earlier, on March 26, 1977. Pan Am Flight 1736, a Boeing 747 jumbo jet, departed from Los Angeles on a long journey. Its first stop was New York, where more passengers boarded, and from there it would cross the Atlantic Ocean to reach its final destination, Las Palmas, in Spain's Canary Islands. The flight was a special charter, fully booked with nearly 400 passengers, many of them older travelers looking forward to a relaxing cruise. Las Palmas, a city perched on the edge of the Atlantic, was a dream destination. Just 100 kilometers off the coast of Morocco, the Canary Islands are known for their warm climate, their palm-lined beaches, and their vibrant tourism. But beneath the beauty lay political unrest. In the 1970s, separatist groups were demanding independence from Spain, and they did not hesitate to use violence. Their actions on this particular day would change history forever. While Pan Am's jumbo jet soared above the Atlantic with Captain Victor Grubbs, First Officer Robert Bragg, and Flight Engineer George Warnes at the controls, another giant of the skies was preparing for departure at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. This was KLM Flight 4805, also a Boeing 747, also bound for Las Palmas. At its helm was Captain Jacob Van Zanten, one of KLM's most senior and respected pilots, alongside First Officer Klaus Mers and Flight Engineer Willem Schroeder. With 235 passengers on board, the KLM aircraft climbed into the skies, its destination the same as the Pan Am flight crossing the ocean. Two flights, two aircraft, two sets of passengers, and one shared destination. Neither crew could know that their paths would cross in the most devastating way imaginable. Meanwhile, at Las Palmas Airport, an ordinary afternoon turned into chaos. Two men quietly entered the terminal and left a bag near a flower shop before disappearing. Inside the bag was a bomb with a timer. At exactly 1 o'clock, a chilling phone call reached the airport reception. A voice claimed responsibility, warning of an imminent explosion. 15 minutes later, the bomb went off. A powerful blast tore through part of the terminal, sending people fleeing in terror. Roof sections collapsed, glass shattered, and panic swept the airport. Although the explosion caused limited casualties, authorities immediately shut down the entire airport. Incoming flights were ordered to divert elsewhere. For KLM Flight 4805, approaching the islands, the message was clear: Las Palmas was closed. The crew was instructed to divert to Tenerife, another island about 110 kilometers away. The KLM aircraft touched down at Tenerife's Los Rodeos Airport, a small regional facility never designed to handle such traffic. Minutes later, Pan Am Flight 1736 received the same diversion order. After a long transatlantic flight, the Pan Am jumbo jet descended onto the same runway. Suddenly, Los Rodeos was overwhelmed. The airport had only one runway, a narrow taxiway, and limited apron space. Yet within hours, it was crowded with jumbo jets far larger than the airport was accustomed to. As more flights diverted, congestion worsened. At first, the weather was clear. Passengers from both aircraft were allowed to stretch their legs, relieved to be on solid ground after long journeys. But the Canary Islands are infamous for sudden weather changes. Surrounded by mountains, the airport sat at an elevation of 2,000 feet. Moist winds from the ocean pushed upward against the peaks, condensing into thick fog in minutes. What was clear skies an hour earlier turned into a dense white curtain. Visibility dropped to as little as 300 meters. Pilots, passengers, and even the control tower staff could barely see the tarmac. In the midst of this, Captain Van Zanten of KLM made a practical decision. His aircraft would refuel at Tenerife before continuing to Las Palmas, saving time once the other airport reopened. But that decision meant the giant KLM jet blocked part of the narrow apron, creating a bottleneck. Pan Am and other aircraft were forced to wait, further increasing congestion. By late afternoon, news finally arrived that Las Palmas Airport had reopened. Both flights began reboarding passengers, eager to continue. But now, with fog settling over the small airport, the stage was set for disaster. At 4:45 p.m., refueling complete, the KLM aircraft prepared to move. Because the apron was too crowded, the control tower instructed Captain Van Zanten to taxi onto the runway itself, roll down to the far end, turn 180 degrees, and line up for departure. The Pan Am crew, in turn, was told to follow the KLM down the runway but exit at taxiway C3, clearing the path for KLM's takeoff. But the fog made this difficult. The Pan Am crew spotted the first two exits, C1 and C2, but missed C3 entirely. Poor signage and the fact that C3 led back toward the crowded apron may have caused them to overlook it. Now, instead of leaving the runway, Pan Am's massive 747 continued to taxi slowly down the centerline. At the far end, KLM was ready for departure. The tower issued routing instructions for after takeoff but did not clear them to actually begin the roll. Despite this, Captain Van Zanten believed permission had been granted. He pushed the throttles forward and announced over the radio, "We are taking off." The controller responded with a brief, "Okay," but then quickly added, "Stand by for takeoff, I will call you." Unfortunately, at that same moment, the Pan Am crew transmitted their own message, "We are still on the runway." The two radio messages overlapped, canceling each other out in the KLM cockpit. The critical warning, "To wait," never reached them clearly. And so, in the dense fog, the KLM jumbo jet accelerated, hurtling forward into the mist. Engines roared as the KLM jumbo jet surged down the runway, fog swallowing everything beyond a few hundred meters. Inside the cockpit, the crew focused on their instruments, unaware of the massive aircraft still taxiing ahead of them. Seconds ticked by, the plane gaining speed, every moment carrying it closer to disaster. Meanwhile, on board the Pan Am 747, the crew strained their eyes through the windshield. The thick fog made it almost impossible to see. Then, through the haze, two piercing lights appeared, headlights racing straight toward them. At first, the Pan Am pilots thought the KLM aircraft might be stationary. But the next instant, they realized with horror, it was charging toward them at full throttle. "Goddamn, that son of a... he's coming!" Captain Grubbs shouted, slamming the throttles forward in a desperate attempt to turn off the runway. The massive aircraft lumbered left, trying to escape, but there was no time. The KLM, now fully committed to takeoff, could no longer stop. In the cockpit of the Dutch aircraft, the flight engineer had overheard a transmission from the control tower mentioning that Pan Am was still on the runway. He voiced his concern, urging the captain to wait. But Captain Van Zanten, a man admired across the airline for his skill and authority, dismissed it, convinced they had clearance. The fog, the pressure of delays, and miscommunication had clouded judgment at the worst possible moment. And then it happened. The KLM lifted slightly, nose rising as the captain tried to clear the obstacle ahead. For a fraction of a second, it looked as though the aircraft might actually leap over its American counterpart. But the attempt came too late. The lower fuselage, engines, and landing gear of the KLM slammed into the upper cabin of Pan Am's jumbo jet. Metal ripped through metal with a deafening roar. The Pan Am's first-class cabin was torn apart in an instant, passengers killed instantly. The KLM's landing gear and right engines sheared through the fuselage, sending fragments flying into the fog. The Dutch aircraft, its undercarriage destroyed, slammed back onto the runway a short distance away and exploded in a ball of fire. Its tanks had been refueled to capacity at Tenerife, and the result was catastrophic. Flames engulfed the wreckage immediately. Every one of the 248 people on board perished in moments. On the Pan Am jet, chaos erupted. Fire spread rapidly through the upper deck, smoke pouring into the cabin. In first class, almost no one survived the impact. But farther back in economy, some passengers still had a chance. A gaping hole had opened in the fuselage where the KLM's engines had torn through. Some survivors scrambled upward, using seatbacks to climb out onto the wing and then leapt 20 feet down to the ground. Others jumped through emergency exits, bruised and burned, but alive. Of the 396 people on Pan Am Flight 1736, only 61 survived. The rest were trapped in the burning wreckage, smoke and flames sealing their fate before help could arrive. At the control tower, confusion reigned. Shrouded in fog, the controllers had not even seen the collision. It was only when another crew, parked on the apron, reported a massive fireball rising from the runway that the magnitude of the disaster became clear. Rescue vehicles rushed toward the flames but struggled to find their way in the fog. Minutes slipped away, and by the time they reached the wreckage, much of it was beyond saving. In total, 583 lives were lost in just a few horrifying minutes, the deadliest accident in aviation history. The investigation that followed uncovered a chilling chain of events. First, the bomb at Las Palmas forced diversions to Tenerife, crowding a small airport unequipped for jumbo jets. Then, KLM's decision to refuel delayed their departure, blocking Pan Am's ability to move earlier. The weather, too, played its part. Fog rolled in suddenly, reducing visibility so severely that neither pilots nor controllers could see what was happening. Poor signage on the taxiways added to the confusion, causing Pan Am to miss the critical exit. But the ultimate responsibility fell on the KLM captain. He had begun his takeoff without explicit clearance, ignoring doubts raised by his own flight engineer and misinterpreting the controller's words. It was a tragic reminder of how authority in the cockpit, once unquestioned, could become dangerous when left unchallenged. The world was shaken by the Tenerife disaster. Aviation experts realized that small miscommunications could have catastrophic consequences. The words takeoff and OK, once commonly used, were banned from casual exchanges between pilots and controllers. Instead, strict phraseology was introduced, cleared for takeoff, or hold position. No ambiguity allowed. Cockpit culture also changed. Before Tenerife, the captain's word was rarely questioned, but afterward, airlines introduced crew resource management. This training encouraged every member of the crew, first officers, engineers, even cabin staff, to speak up if they noticed danger. Authority could no longer silence reason. Airports, too, were transformed. Ground radar systems became mandatory, allowing controllers to monitor aircraft positions even in fog. Taxiways were redesigned, better signage added, and holding points clearly marked. These measures were meant to ensure that never again could two aircraft unknowingly occupy the same runway. Today, Tenerife has two airports, the older Los Rodeos in the north, where the disaster occurred, and a newer one in the south, built with better infrastructure and less vulnerable to fog. The memory of what happened in 1977 still lingers in the aviation community, a permanent scar and a permanent lesson. The Tenerife disaster was not caused by a single mistake, but by a chain of events: political violence, diversion, poor weather, miscommunication, human pressure, and finally, a tragic error in judgment. One decision alone might not have doomed the flights. But together, they formed a sequence that no one could stop once it began. The story of those moments remains one of the darkest chapters in aviation history. Two massive aircraft, both bound for the same sunny paradise, collided in the fog of confusion, leaving behind grief, lessons, and reforms that continue to shape the way people fly today.